we do, Lynn Dyer will kick us off. So waiting for a few remaining people to sign in.
Hi folks, this is Lynn Dyer with the Foodservice Packaging Institute. By my calculations, it's 2 o'clock. We're going to give everyone a few more minutes to sign on and then we'll get started. Okay, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. A few technical details for you folks. We're going to go ahead and get started here. And what we're doing is we have the speakers will be able to speak. At this point, we're not going to be able to hear you, but that's all right. You've got your controls on the right-hand side that allow you to make sure you can hear us and that we won't be able to hear you. And then if you have any questions that you would like to submit to folks, if you could please do that by using the panel on the right-hand side under questions. If you submit the questions, then we'll take a look at them and we'll answer those towards the end of the webinar. Another bit of information for you folks is that we will be recording this session and we will be available, the session will be available on FPI's website in probably another week or so. All right, we're up to 123 people. That's great. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the agenda for today. We'll just do a real brief introduction so you know who's speaking. We have a number of fantastic presentations from our friends at the Biodegradable Products Institute. David Brooks is going to be speaking for us there, National Restaurant Association, Jeff Clark, and then also the U.S. Composting Council, and that's represented by Michelle Young. More information on that later. And then also we'll be wrapping up with a Q&A session towards the end. So if we want to do a quick introduction to who you're going to hear on the phone today. Again, this is Lynn Dyer. I'm the president of the Foodservice Packaging Institute. For those of you who don't know the Foodservice Packaging Institute, or FPI for short, we're actually the trade association for the food service packaging industry in North America. Our members include folks that make the raw materials and the machinery for the food service packaging industry, the folks that actually make the packaging itself, and then we also offer free memberships to food service distributors and food service operators as well. I will also mention that the Food Service Packaging Institute is what we call material neutral, meaning we're there to represent and promote and advocate for the interests of the food service packaging industry itself, not necessarily the individual materials. So our members include people that make paper products, foam products, plastic products, aluminum products, you name the material, we include it all in our membership. One of the things that's of interest to many of you on the phone is that in recent years, FPI has been focusing some of its efforts on the topic of recovery. And so a couple of years ago, we actually started a group called the Recovery Alliance, or PRA for short, and the Plastics Recovery Group, PRG for short. And those groups are actually working on recovery of specifically food service packaging products. In our case, we're looking at recycling, we're looking at composting, we're looking at energy recovery, whatever is that highest and best use option out there. But the focus for today's call is really composting of food service packaging products, and specifically compostable food service packaging products, and making sure they're actually getting composted. When we first started talking about setting up this webinar, the idea was really to try to figure out how we could pass along some good information to you all on various aspects of compostable food service packaging, and really bring together a number of the supply chain partners. Because we realize that we all need to be working together, from the raw materials, the converters, the operators, and even further downstream when you get to folks like the composters, city officials, government officials. We all need to make sure we're talking and make sure that these products are successfully composted. So I'm very pleased to report that while we thought this was a very exciting topic, evidently a lot of you did as well, because we had close to 300 people register for the conference. And as of right now, we have almost 150 of you on the call, so that's fantastic to hear. So today you'll hear from me. I'm going to start things off. As I mentioned, our featured speakers today are going to be David Brooks, the Certification Manager from the Biodegradable Products Institute, Jeff Clark, Conserve Sustainability Education Program Director for the National Restaurant Association, and again, as I mentioned, Michelle Young, who is the City of San Jose's Organics Manager and also the co-chair of U.S. Composting Council's Compostable Plastics Task Force. And then the other voice you'll hear in the background here is Keith Harrison, who is Senior Consultant with Resource Recycling Systems. We've actually hired RRS to help us with the recovery work that is ongoing for FPI, and she's going to help us today with the question and answer session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, who is David Brooks. If we could have David's slides come up on the screen, please.
Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes. Thanks, David.
Great. Hi. Thank you very much, Lynn, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. Let me tell you a little bit about the BPI. Hold on just a second here. There we go. We were founded in 1999, and we are the largest certifier of compostable products in North America. We have about 150 members. That's growing. Most of the time we get about 1 or 2 members a month. And we have independently certified 3,300 different types of products. They range from food service packaging to collection bags to a range of different products that all have a place and purpose in collecting more compostable trash. Our products have been tested to meet existing standards for biodegradable plastics by the ASTM, or biodegradable materials such as paper and fiber that have been laminated with a polymer substance. And they're akin to similar standards that are in Europe. There's an organization called VINSOT and DENSERCO that use European standards. We don't cross-certify products, but we do recognize and accept data that was conducted in Europe for our own certification purposes. And our members span the entire value chain from raw material suppliers, fiber producers, pulp manufacturers, converters that take those raw materials and make them into finished products such as injection molded plates, injection molded cutlery or thermoform plates or paper plates or laminated products or bags, distributors that are either private label these products or just resell the products, and then branded resellers such as shopping centers or department stores that want to maintain the certification logo on their products. The heart of our program, we are essentially a certification and marketing company. So we're a not-for-profit organization. We independently test and certify products, and then we give our members a logo to put on those products. There's so much consumer confusion about the terms biodegradable, compostable, whether those terms, whether the product claim is accurate and backed by science. So we've created a program that does just that. It is independently verified by scientific experts, and we force people, we give people a licensing agreement that they can use to put on packaging and on their products to make truthful and accurate claims about the nature of their products. We feel that this is a very high level of compliance and environmental marketing, where you have independent scientifically based tests that are verified by third-party experts to create a marketing claim that's believable. Let's talk a little bit about the universe of products. The term itself has sort of been misused, and a lot of times it's very vague. When you talk about what is biodegradable, you have to qualify what that means. And a lot of people say or believe that the term biodegradable is just inherently good, but they miss the point that you really have to explain exactly what you mean. Is the product, has it been tested to biodegrade in an ocean or marine environment? Has it been tested to safely decompose in the soil? In our case, the Compostable Logo and the ASTM testing standards have been measuring the disintegration and complete safe biodegradation in an actively managed industrial compost environment. And so that's what the standards say, and that's what we're about for the Compostable Logo program. Within the universe of compostables, though, composters have the discretion of accepting more than just BPI certified products. We believe we cover the full gamut, but there are some exceptions. Sometimes you have companies that are self-certified where they will make a claim about a product being biodegradable, but the test data that they use to make that claim has not been independently verified. And so some composters will accept that without going to the higher standard of our BPI certification, which is independent review of those scientific tests. You also have some composters will accept products that they presume to be okay. Craft paper bags is probably one example. Unlaminated or uncoated paper products is something else, where composters have individual opinions about whether or not it's safe to compost, and they don't necessarily need or look for a certification of those standards. And then finally, there are products that we would not certify and yet are okay for composting. And that would be things like wooden drink stirrers or bamboo plates, things that have, they don't disintegrate within the time frame associated with ASTM testing, but yet composters don't have a big problem with these types of products because they eventually will disintegrate over time, and they don't impact the aesthetics of the commercial humus that they're producing. So this gives you kind of a landscape about where we operate and what we're about. I want to talk a little bit about the broader context about where we are with recycling. And right now, the term recycling has, in the past, has come to mean kind of like the reclamation and repurposing of rigid containers and maybe paper products, but clean, dry, source-separated raw materials that have been kind of repurposed back into similar durable goods, or in some cases, repurposed back into the original newspapers, then are converted maybe into boxes maybe turned into other boxes or into shopping bags. But not necessarily what we're focused on today. When you look at recycling, though, as a broader mandate for landfill diversion, keeping things out of a landfill, you then start to look at other products that could be recycled by organic means, but not necessarily turned back into a plant or food. So just by looking at this chart here, it tends to show what we're doing today, that 34% of landfill diversion is your traditional recyclables. That recycling and that landfill diversion rate really hasn't budged that much over the past 10 to 15 years. It's sort of plateaued. But if you have a broader definition about what recycling is all about, it's a higher, better use, and it's also about keeping things out of a landfill, you literally can jump your landfill diversion rates by 50% and go from 34 to 53%. So this is sort of an important kind of mind shift that we want people to start thinking about when you look at easy to recover products, and then you have impractical to recover products that do make up a substantial portion of the solid waste stream. And you can see here one of the things that's, we have a great story when you break down recycling by things that are easy to recover and clean, source separated. When it's impractical, it's the yuck factor. It's moisture, it's leftover foods, it's cross-contamination of products. And yet all these things have something in common. And then when you throw in food waste, which is probably another 25% of what gets sent to the landfill today, they're all compostable. They're all readily recyclable in a relatively low capital intensive manufacturing process that can be performed locally. And it's an amazing story about when you get behind this kind of activity, you can achieve significant amounts of landfill diversion and recycling in the broad definition of that term. So here's kind of an example. On my speaker's notes, there's some math that goes to some of the assumptions here. But basically, when you look at these things that are in the municipal solid waste stream today, you see huge opportunities for capturing things that are really going to a landfill and have no alternative, because there's no infrastructure today. There's a growing infrastructure, but there's nothing today. And many of these things probably look like the waste stream that comes out of a lot of fast food and restaurant operations. Disposable cups and plates, tissues and towels, wet and wax corrugated, wet papers, and of course food scraps. All these things taken together are eminently recyclable by composting, but currently, we're still in the early days of where we are in terms of making that happen. It is starting to happen in a lot of communities, and residential food waste collection is occurring a lot. And we co-sponsor with Biocycle magazine a website called Find a Composter, and they talk about the fact that there's about 450 food waste composting sites in North America. We just completed an audit and a refresh of that database, and we'll be publishing that very shortly. But it's showing a continuing trend for a lot more collection of compost, a lot more collection of organic waste, and a lot more composting going on of these of organics, mixed organics. Cities of San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, San Diego, Austin, Texas are also doing intensive recycling efforts, moving in on a goal of zero waste, and they offer curbside collection, household collection of organics, and they're seeing remarkable results. The city of Portland, I think, went to bi-weekly trash collection because there's so little trash left over because of the success of some of their composting and recycling operations. We're also seeing a lot of activities from sporting events, sort of single point source generators like the Rose Garden Arena in Portland and Safeco Field in Washington, where a lot of these operators, concession operators, are replacing plastics with compostables and literally recycling almost all the trash that they generate. They're also commenting, we participated in the Green Sports Alliance conference here in New York about a month ago, and a lot of people are saying that the cost of compostable products has kind of reached parity with plastic disposables. So the idea that they're actually saving money by going through recycling by composting as opposed to landfilling, that tends to take on a little more importance, that not only is this a green activity, but it's also a money-saving activity. So the value of compostable plastics is to replace the non-degradables and facilitate the collection of that very large fraction of the waste stream that's already food scraps. And this was made, there was a presentation recently by Dick Lilly, director of the Seattle Public Works, that kind of brought this home, is that food waste is the real prize. A lot of composters want this. There's tremendous amounts of volume there, and it's one of the biggest contributors for unintended biodegradation that happens in landfills. You have a lot of people that are really focused in on that. At a macro sense, we're starting to see a lot of, here in the Northeast, a lot of state governments are recognizing that food waste is something that's not desirable in a landfill, and going to the point of basically banning banning the disposal of food waste going into the town landfills, to city dumps and things like that. So we're going to see a lot more interest and awareness in food waste composting, and it's going to be driven by a lot of municipalities kind of recognizing that biodegradable trash has no place in a landfill to begin with. We ought to do something better with it. So this ties into food service in a couple of different ways. We think that composting makes a lot of sense, but you have to look at it from your own operation. You know, will you save money? Can you do the math, look at the whole disposal infrastructure? And is this a sustainable and real benefit? Is this consistent with a higher and better use for all the materials? Rather than looking at disposables, perhaps you should look at mugs that it could be rewashed and reused. The idea is not so much to use more compostable disposables. The idea is to keep things up the disposal pyramid. And is this something that you should be doing because it's part of a broader environmental theme for your operation? To help prospective manufacturers and converters kind of go through this, we've created a decision tree program on our website. You can go here. It's bit.ly/should-I. And that would allow you to kind of go through a decision tree that we've created that helps you think through some of the issues and some of the requirements of why you might want to try with compostable products. So we think composting makes a lot of sense for food service operators when the end waste stream is mostly food waste and mixed organics. When the serviceware is soiled and it's really not practical to be recycled. If your locale has high tipping fees or high landfill rates, or if you have a consumer clientele that really likes to shop and dine with brands that are environmentally positioned, that have kind of a holistic environmental strategy. Zero waste and composting is part of that picture. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it's a really important part. And then also, if your local town has an emerging composting infrastructure, it's also an opportunity maybe to lobby the local town to get one if you don't have one. We see the biodegradable products as being kind of a key to the puzzle. Biodegradable products are only about maybe 5% of the entire solid waste stream that might be in a traditional food service operation. All of the other products that are there are commingled wastes that I was talking about before. And yet just by replacing the plastics that might be commingled with that waste, you make all of that trash compatible with composting. And it's very easy then to take that and compost that. And this is what composters see after a food service operator has made the decision to compost. It's not perfect, and this is the theory about composting, and there's a great deal of trust and hope that goes into that pile. Composter is trusting and hoping that the service operator, have made the switch, have trained your staff, and have converted the products over to be biodegradable and to be compostable, BPI certified. If not, they will likely ban your trash, and they will never allow you to take your trash to be there again. A lot of times, if there's plastics mixed in there, it makes the humus virtually unsellable. It's impossible or very difficult to screen out non-degradable plastic fragments. So this is the importance of the BPI program, is to be able to provide a high degree of trust that says that these products that you're using look and feel just like plastics, but they will safely disintegrate into a compost operation and will not harm the economic sustainability of composting. So that's why that's kind of why we exist, is to give composters the assurance that we've done very thorough testing that's been independently reviewed by third-party experts, and to give consumers and buyers kind of a clear signal of what to buy in the marketplace, so that they don't cause downstream problems and don't, it's basically, if you have one or two incidences like this where plastics are included, you might be banned from the composter, and your entire environmental, your organics diversion strategy might be side-railed simply because you used the wrong materials. And so that's kind of what I'd like to get across today is that compostable products help make composting practical. We can achieve source separation through substitution and reduce or dramatically eliminate pre-sorting and post-screening to get rid of plastic fragments. This makes it easier for food service operators to comply with composters' requirements, and it also allows a lot of institutions and a lot of other operations, food service operations, to have a very powerful landfill diversion strategy. So we'd like to kind of leave the main talk here. Composting can accelerate recycling rates. We think that the long-term ban on food waste going to landfills is going to help accelerate interest and awareness for source-separated and organic composting. We think that a lot of food service operators can save money by doing this, not just be greener, but actually save operational costs. But the requirement that products be certified to compost or to work directly with a composter to educate the composter and get that level of trust, that's essential. Composters operate on a fairly thin margin, and so it's very important that the composters trust and believe that the generator of the waste really understands their problems, because after processing the waste, you have to make sure that the composter can sell that product and stay to make money, or else the entire process is not going to be sustainable. So if there's any other information, there's some links here. This is actually probably more practical for the printouts, but there's my contact information is here, as well as various web links, and you can go visit our website. We just launched the new product category, product catalog, so you can actually search for compostable products by SKU number to make better and informed purchase decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Now we'll turn it over to Jeff Clark with the National Restaurant Association. Jeff?
All right. Hey, this is Keith. David, while Jeff's getting booted up, I wondered if you could answer a quick clarifying question. You mentioned that some of the materials are presumed okay. Are those presumed okay allowed to use the BPI logo?
No.
Okay.
The presumption is based on the composter. And a lot of composters are very good stewards of their own operation and the soil, so they kind of understand instinctively what's safe and what's not. The biggest concern that they might have is for a product that looks and feels like a plastic. That's when they tend, the alarm bells go off, and it's very much a, prove to me that this is compostable. And we offer the ability to basically prove to the composter that has been tested, it's been reviewed by independent experts, and so that's the assurance that they would need. What I meant is that the presumption for paper products, most composters will accept paper products because they will eventually, they'll quickly disintegrate and they won't be distinguishable in the finished humus, so it probably is not going to cause them a problem. I'm sure there's little tiny exceptions to that one, like labels on fruit I know is a big problem. The little banana peel sticker, that's a huge nuisance problem for taking food waste. But okay. By and large, the presumption is made by the composter that it'll be safe.
All right, good. Thanks for that. And I see a lot of other questions coming in. We're going to hold most of them to the end, just trying to fill that change time wisely. So Jeff, it looks like you have controls, and if you click OK, we should be able to see your screen.
Great. Is it up and everyone can see it?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I think, yeah, good.
What about now? Does that work?
Oh, it was there? Yep, there it is. You did
Okay,
it.
great. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. That was a great presentation, David. Thank you. Again, my name is Jeff Clark. I am the Conserve Program Director at the National Restaurant Association, and here to talk a little bit about compostable food service packaging from the restaurateur's perspective. So to start off, first we're just going to talk a little bit about what the association is and does. We represent the restaurant industry, which is the nation's second largest private employer, an industry with 13 million jobs. Nearly 1 million restaurants and food service locations exist in the U.S., and then of course there's an annual projected sales for 2013 of $660 billion. So as part of not only representing the restaurants in the United States, there's something called the Conserve Initiative that, along with some people here at the association, I help to run. It is a series of educational best practices, 95 in total, with 64 videos in sort of 5 categories. And it's actually free for any restaurateur to join. And it focuses on energy efficiency, water conservation, waste reduction, buildings and construction, and then program administration. So things like training your employees, joining Energy Star, purchasing renewable energy credits, for example. And you can learn more by going to restaurant.org/conserve. And we've also recently just began to relaunch the Zero Waste Zones program in Atlanta. It's currently under review of the criteria for participation. It does leverage waste hauling and recycling services by zoning businesses into an area for ease of pickup and hauling. And we're hoping to finalize the criteria and launch on October 23rd of this year. So very exciting effort, and we're really happy to really get this moving forward. And it does leverage the Conserve best practices in water conservation, waste reduction, and energy efficiency. So now I want to talk a little bit about some barriers to using compostable food service packaging, kind of from the restaurant's view. And these aren't locked in stone. These are just some things that I've sort of found in talking to the industry. And you know, not an exhaustive list, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end when we get there. So the first one, just to mention, is location. You need to have a composting facility nearby. Otherwise, you're really just basically putting money down the drain if you're buying compostable food service packaging that you can't then compost. There's a high correlation, it's not perfect, but a high correlation between the landfill costs in the United States and where composting facilities are actually located. So you can see the higher the actual tipping fee in the Northeast and along the coasts on the West, there's more composting facilities available. So if you're in the Southeast where tipping fees are quite low, there's just less compost because often it's just very cheap to stick it in a landfill. So again, before looking at purchasing compostable food service packaging and compostable plastics, is there a facility near you that can take it? You know, about 25% accept compostable plastic products, so make sure you're one of them, and you know, really work and, as David mentioned, build the trust with your composter. Otherwise, it's really a lot of effort for naught. So second barrier, there's some interesting actions to try and differentiate compostable plastics from normal plastics. And these are often specific wording or a green stripe or brown stripe on the package. So Cedar Grove is a composting facility in Seattle, have a fantastic program, and how they differentiate their products that can go in the landfills. They have a brown stripe. Well, that can interfere with the actual company's branding and logos. So here's some examples of a Bo Loco I took photos of here locally in DC, and they have really integrated composting and recycling into their brand, and it's all over their marketing materials and in their restaurants and on their website. But sticking a brown stripe on any of these products would really change the look and feel of their cups. So there's a lot of hesitancy to doing so. Of course, when you get into stadiums and all the wonderful efforts that they're taking on, you can see all the different brands and product placements on all of these different cups. And while they're all compostable, to try and get everyone on the same logo or have the same wording would be challenging. So a third issue is a split incentive. And this comes into the actual multi-unit restaurant chain. And the main split incentive is between purchasing and operations. And purchasing, of course, they look at buying the products, the packaging, in an office usually, and operations are the individuals who work in the restaurants at the location who do the source separation and the food service and everything else. The purchasing side of a multi-unit restaurant chain, they want to save money. Their incentives are to save money on the front end, reduce their costs as much as possible by getting the lowest price up front. On the operations side, they want to save money in the restaurant. And while there's some training costs involved, if the compostable material is switched out and they can really save a lot of money per location for landfill exchanges, or getting rid of taking trash to the landfill, then they can save a lot of money there. But you can see there's a difference in what each incentive plays in these two parts of a single organization. So one thing that a lot of individuals have found is that you really need to break down these incentive silos, so that if you can take a whole view approach, take the money, and oftentimes a lot of money, on the operations savings, and then funnel that back into purchasing, then purchasing might be willing to pay a little bit more price for compostable packaging and other products. And it just takes some time and effort in thinking about this on an executive level, of course. So the fourth barrier is cost and performance. And while costs have certainly come down, as mentioned, which is fantastic, performance is challenging. Each restaurant chain or each restaurant location is going to have different performance standards, and it's really difficult for the manufacturers of these products to satisfy everybody and everyone's different needs. So an example is Chipotle, which is another really, really active, environmentally friendly brand, and they're really taking a strong line on being sustainable and reducing their waste footprint, and they currently have carry-out bags and kids' meals and toothpicks, napkins, all kinds of fantastic stuff. But from them, there are some cost issues to consider, and they've shied away from a few things because it hasn't met their performance standards, specifically cutlery, and really looking at how that functions in their restaurant is often a big challenge. So that's been a very large concern for many, many larger chains that might want to go into compostable food service packaging and cutlery issues. So what are we doing about all this? Well, the National Restaurant Association has kind of four main approaches to this, two of which we've already mentioned: the CONSERVE program, which is education, Zero Waste Zones program, and of course working with the Food Service Packaging Institute and other partners to promote education. But I'm going to highlight two efforts that we haven't talked about yet, and that's the Food Waste Reduction Alliance and a Duke report that was issued to us back in April of this past year. So the Food Waste Reduction Alliance is a group of GMA, FMI, and the National Restaurant Association, and it's a 3-year initiative, and it really is looking at how to reduce waste and food waste specifically, often through donation. And we have a lot of really, really great partners in this initiative who are working on research and other efforts. And the kind of three key goals are to reduce food loss whenever preventable, divert all edible food to food banks, and then unavoidable waste that can be used can be composted, given to animals for food, or converted into energy. And while this isn't necessarily directly going into compostable food service packaging, it is helping to re-engage the industry and think about waste in a different way. And along with that are surveys, research reports, and toolkits that are currently under development that will go to the industry to help them change and develop that trust with composters, food donation banks, and other efforts. For the Duke University study, every year there is a spring consulting project. So it's a group of 4 master's students who have to take on a real-world client and try to solve a problem and then submit a report. So this study was on a hypothetical level. If you could convert Durham, North Carolina, where Duke University is located, how would city managers, how would the city itself change their policy options to try to get Durham to become zero waste for restaurants? Now, you could write a PhD on this topic in general, so we've kept it very narrow to help them out. So as a result, Recommendation 1, they found that in order to really lower costs for composting, they needed to create public-private partnerships between the city and waste haulers to get as many restaurants enrolled as possible to kind of tip that cost, that enough people had to enroll so that on a per pound basis of hauling and pickup would be reduced significantly. And obviously this is different in a city like San Francisco that has had a program up and running for many, many years, but Durham does not. So this is some great advice here. Recommendation 2 was to really encourage entrepreneurship, and local businesses could really get involved to help solve this coordination problem of pickups and transportation on a cost-effective manner, because it is really challenging, and local groups often would do a better job than a large city-based coordination effort from city government. Plus, it also helps us spur growth and innovation and job creation. Recommendation 3 was to lower barriers and get out additional information from the National Restaurant Association in achieving zero waste, and get other communities, not just Durham, involved. And as previously mentioned, we're doing that by having educational toolkits, the Conserve program, zero waste zones, and webinars like this one. And finally, as appropriate for this webinar, it was to promote sustainable packaging as a vehicle for getting food into composting, which is a great quote from the city of Seattle. So I want to keep it short and sweet. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, of course, at the end. Here's my contact information, and thank you all very much.
Thanks, Jeff. I think we'll switch things over to Michelle now. Michelle, you should see that on your screen, I think. Good, it looks good. Michelle, we can't quite hear you, though.
All right. Am I connected now?
Yep, you sound good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to David and Jeff for really teeing up the conversation. And while I was on mute, I was like, yeah, good point, writing things down, capturing a lot of things. So I get to have a great opportunity to be sort of a closer in this conversation and take a lot of the things that we've talked about so far and translate them into some actions that are being undertaken by the U.S. Composting Council Compostable Plastics Task Force. And I'm obligated by my contract with them, I'm just kidding, that my disclaimer is that while I'm very honored to be able to represent the work that a lot of people are doing across the United States, it's also pretty daunting to try and represent all the activity that's happening in the organizations and efforts that I'm going to talk about. So I will do my best, but really we're representing some really big efforts here which are completely exciting. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about again are a little bit of a review, but this shows where the genesis of our conversation has been from the U.S. Composting Council, from the composting industry perspective. So as both Jeff and David mentioned, our goal is really to maximize the diversion of food waste, which in many communities is a relatively new material that they're trying to capture. It's very complicated to manage because it's decomposing all the time. And so both having good ways to collect that and also to streamline the behavior for sorting those materials in places like stadiums and public events, where you make it very easy for people to put all of their food-related materials into a composting container. Those are definitely very strong goals in the solid waste industry. And of course, there's a couple of other things that have come up in conversations that people, really have their eyes on as well. Using renewable resources for the manufacture of packaging is something that I think is important as we think of sustainable packaging, as Jeff said. So we're definitely seeing that as a benefit. And then a lot of people definitely have their eyes on what's going to happen as the anaerobic digestion infrastructure potentially expands in the United States, and how will these materials add to both the potential for renewable energy and compost as a back end. So again, just keeping the whole conversation in the context of making sure that we're removing any barriers that we can perceive in order to really get these benefits that we know are there. So as we started this conversation through the U.S. Composting Council several years ago, we developed some symposia where we had full-day conversations with everybody that we could think of to invite at that time. We've had roundtable discussions at various conferences, and we continue to have working group calls with the work groups that I'll describe. And these are some of the things that come back again and again, and I think this adds to lists that were put up from both of the previous speakers, and I'll go into a little more detail on what the working groups are doing in these areas where we really want to make sure that we're streamlining the process so the benefits, the potential benefits of the products can be realized. So in our first meetings, we identified key challenges with identification and labeling, which we've talked about. Enforcement and legislation. This is a very interesting space where there's a lot happening right now across the United States, trying to get this this conversation expanded, out of California and into the rest of the United States. The opportunity to look at the ASTM standards, certification standards for these materials, and the potential for use of these materials in the organics certification program, and then finally wrapping it up in a bow, as we've talked about in several the previous presentations, through education of the consumers and end users. So this conversation, while it started with this particular conversation started in the U.S. Composting Council, it quickly became clear that it was a coalition kind of a situation where we needed to work together. There were a lot of existing conversations, but the task force was established by the U.S. Composting Council, which is the largest trade association that represents composters, equipment manufacturers, marketing professionals, etc. So we really wanted to make sure that the voice of the folks that were receiving this material end of stream as a processing feedstock were included in the conversations that were happening throughout the United States about how to optimize the use of these materials. So as we got together as composters, we quickly saw that there were other key conversations that were happening that we needed to really connect to. And many individuals in the conversation were already invested in this alphabet soup of key conversations. So the Biodegradable Products Institute, which you've heard a lot about, they're key players. The ASTM certification standards and testing certification group, very involved national process, so we needed to really link into that conversation and be part of that. The Federal Trade Commission and their green guides, already established, already conversations there that we needed to align to. And then the National Organics Program was another key conversation in terms of what is happening to determine whether these materials can be considered for use in organic food production, and not so much serviceware, but right now the use of agricultural field films and things like that. And these are just a few. Obviously, the folks that we're hearing from today from the Foodservice Packaging Institute, the Restaurant Association, and many others are part of this integrated conversation that the Composting Council wanted to become part of. The composters are really focused on this end-of-life processing because, as we saw in the previous pictures, they are receiving the materials, and so they're really looking at key issues of identification of the materials so that they can determine whether they want to receive them at their facilities. What is the disintegration level for these different materials, including materials that are certified through ASTM. And again, as been mentioned previously, what is the impact on product quality, either when the materials are not certified and don't disintegrate, or they partially disintegrate due to the variability in their facilities, etc. So the composters, loud and clear in our first symposium, said that they wanted to be part of this conversation. And so the U.S. Composting Council National Task Force for Compostable Plastics was established actually as an experiment. We went through a full day of the symposium, and we were so excited about the conversation, and we were so concerned that we wouldn't get together again for another year. And at that point, you know, you kind of say, well, last year we talked about this. What's happened in this space? And, you know, raise your hand if you've ever been in that experience, and a year later you find out, oh, we're still in the same bullet point. That challenge is still out there, and I'm not clear what's happened, or maybe nothing's happened. So a lot of people, thankfully, have decided to join these working groups in order to continue the conversation throughout the year and actually take on real action items to move the conversation on a national level. Our goal is to have participants that represent the full value cycle of the materials, from the manufacturing and purchasing to the processing and return to compost products. So we're thrilled to have opportunities like this to reach out to audiences who may not know that this conversation is happening, so that you can join in the conversations that we're involved in. Because it really is only going to work if we get everybody at the table, so that we're not duplicating efforts, we're not missing important points that come from different perspective levels of the different providers and agencies. So over time, we've streamlined three, excuse me, let me get that out of the way here. Three specialized working groups: legislation and enforcement, labeling and education, and standards and operations. And I'll talk a little bit about those. I'm also going to tell everybody on the call, and anybody you know, how to join these working groups to really tackle these issues on an ongoing basis and bring the experience from the agencies that you represent into the conversation we're trying to facilitate. So again, the working groups have scheduled meetings, as well as you know, key large meeting points, face-to-face meeting points at the U.S. Composting Council Annual Conference, which is coming up in January 2014 here in Oakland, California, as well as BioCycle. Now, we usually have at BioCycle West Coast the roundtable meetings, but at some of the other BioCycle conferences, they're also obviously richly continuing this conversation. So I want to talk a little bit about what the different working groups, what their goals are, and what they've actually been up to. Because again, it's very exciting to see people sometimes in the margins of their workspace taking these extra things on and participating in these groups to you know, keep moving the boulder up the hill or across the field or to the compost facility, wherever. So on the legislation and enforcement team, really one of their key goals is to look at the success that we have had here in California with SB 567 and figure out how to move that case study, if you will, through the other states throughout the U.S. 567 was an expansion bill that was effective in January 2013, and it basically expanded the scope of end-of-life labeling from bags and food packaging to all plastic products. So this is linking legislation that really relies on the certification agencies that we've talked about, the testing agencies that we're talking about, and really is proving to be a great model. What we're seeing in other places is that there's some growing pains and some lessons learned, and we're really wanting this group and folks like you to continue participating in this conversation, so as the legislation is expanded in other states, it really represents what we're learning through these joint conversations. So what I'm hearing from the legislation group is they felt that, you know, Oregon tried to encapsulate California's work over many, many years into legislation that might have tried to take on too much. I think their big takeaway for me, they wanted me to share, was you know, look at small increments in terms of legislative impact and what you're trying to take on. There's also legislation out of North Carolina, HB 315, which should be taking place July 1st. There's still some review happening of that and the potential for some amendment. But again, these are new legislation that are coming out and allowing us to expand the conversation and look at what works, what might be challenging, and how these labeling legislation can be implemented throughout the U.S. Another key goal of this group is to take these lessons learned and develop template bill language. Using the labeling guidelines that exist through the U.S. Composting Council, through BPI, through the FTC Green Guides, etc., in order to provide streamlined guidelines for states that may want to develop bill language, and again, to make sure that this is certified by scientifically backed third-party verifiers, such as BPI. You know, they may not be able to say BPI in the legislation, but this is the kind of thing that they'd be looking for, is this certification is key. So looking to 2014, the group has some questions about what the priority will be for this based on, you know, activity in various state legislatures. So they're really focused on getting industry agencies together, and again, taking small bites and looking at focused bans potentially on banning terms like biodegradable, degradable, and decomposable. So this group is really getting up to speed and you know, moving through the potential to expand lessons learned from California to other states throughout the U.S. So that would be a great place for you to participate if you're interested in legislation and enforcement. The other working group we have, one of the others, is standards and operations. This group is really focused on what's happening at the compost facilities and how do testing standards, compostability standards, etc., impact field operations at a processing facility. So one of the opportunities that they're taking is the ASTM 5-year review cycle. And so a big part of the work of this group is to refine the time, temperature, and disintegration standards using more information from field studies to impact and improve what is primarily a lab standard, and helping to calibrate that lab standard to what happens in compost facilities throughout the U.S. And this variability between composting facilities is really important, because you have material in aerated piles that's not turned. You have material that's turned. You have material in bags, in buildings, outside. All of these factors can influence the disintegration of these materials that have received certification, for example. And so we're trying to learn through creating testing protocols at various facilities how we can standardize how the materials are handled so that you could compare disintegration results from facilities throughout different regions and using similar composting practices. So testing protocols are happening at a variety of composting facilities, and if any of you are excuse me, are doing testing like this, we would love to add your testing protocols to our data set so that we can maximize the amount of the results and be able to avoid having every single facility in the United States have to test these materials. So if we get enough data points here, we can start to make good assumptions about disintegration at compost facility types. The conversation for the National Organic Standard is also an important one. Anytime these standards are reviewed or there's opportunities to bring issues forward. BPI currently has an active petition to the Organic Standard Board for film plastics, for agricultural film plastics. So that's a very interesting conversation to look at. I know it's not specific to your packaging institute, but the next generation petition from them could be a petition for serviceware. So learning how that conversation looks and what we're learning through the BPI petition could help in the next generation conversation as we look at petitioning for the use of serviceware in certified organic agricultural production. So important end-of-life considerations for these materials for composters that are producing certified organic compost and for whom that's an important part of their market. Our final group is labeling and education. Again, it links back to some of the other groups, so we'll go quickly through this. Key issues that we've come up with again and again, labeling inconsistency and confusion among buyers and end users. So this group has done some great work on working off of the BPI labeling guidelines and creating composting council guidelines. They're very well aligned. You can look at both of them and get really great information. But we're hoping, again, to try and standardize that communication about what labeling should include so that anybody who's developing those can base it off of accepted and sort of peer-reviewed guidelines. Again, logo and claim confusion. When we did surveys among municipal employees and who are end users in many cases, their number one area of need was to understand what the different logos, different labels mean. It's very confusing to them. They feel like they need a chemistry or science background to understand the differences between all of these different claims. And so one of the things that this group did was to create a compostable plastics white paper, which you can see at the U.S. Composting Council website. And that attempted to talk through, in fairly simple terms, what some of the different plastics terms are and some of the issues in the industry for users like municipalities. And then the biggest issue that they've come up with in this particular group is that there's very limited consumer awareness of the challenges to the composting industry, the fact that many of these materials actually do not end up with a composter, and if they do, some percentage of them may end up in a landfill because they don't disintegrate and they need to be screened out at the end. So as was mentioned earlier, we need to really think through the decision tree for these folks to make sure that their purchase of these materials is taking them to an end result, which is actually composting and full recycling of these materials. The challenge here is that it's a very diverse group. If you're talking about everyone from residents to restaurateurs to municipalities to composters, plastics industry, etc. Big bite to take all at one time. So we did start with municipalities as facilitators of this conversation, because what we know is consumers call the municipalities to say, what should I buy? How do I manage this material? Is this spoon compostable? The composters also ask the same question of their public agency representatives. So we really need to get this information into these sort of middle managers so that they can help, they can understand it themselves and help to distribute the information. So our first SWAT at the messaging for end users was very lucky, because we got $50,000 from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. So if any of you are on the phone, thank you so much, to develop a municipal toolbox. Again, taking one slice of the communications pie and focusing on getting these tools targeted for municipalities who are starting food waste programs, managing compost contracts, etc. So this project involves a survey. We've already completed a survey of municipalities and got over 150, well actually more like 175 municipalities to complete a survey and interviews. So an additional 25 have agreed to do interviews with us and provide resources that they've developed. And then we're going to be combining all these resources at the U.S. Composting Council website to share what is happening across the U.S. in terms of legislation and ordinances, outreach and messaging, labeling and standards, etc. Trying to create a clearinghouse where folks can go to link to all these agencies such as yourselves that are doing these great work. I've heard a lot about toolkits and decision trees from the agencies on the call today. We want to be able to link municipalities to all of these great resources in one location. We'll be doing webinars and a workshop in January to test these tools and get input on these tools. So hopefully you'll be able to join us as we test drive the toolkit and the tools we have there and take folks through a workshop at the U.S. Composting Council workshop. We're also really inviting you to participate here as well. So again, I've already heard from a couple of the presenters that there are tools that I want to make sure we have in our resource arsenal, including the toolkit that Jeff talked about, the decision tree that David talked about, the university study. These are the kinds of things that we really want to have at a click, you know, connecting all the clicks so that folks can find all this good information. So in closing, the members of the task force and the working groups really want to continue to invite all of you to join the conversation through a variety of means. Joining one of the task force working groups, which means you can join in on calls with up to 50 representatives from across the United States who are talking through these issues on a regular basis and taking on action items that need to be addressed in the industry. We certainly invite you to share tools with us or share the tools you're interested in finding through the Toolkit project, which will be ongoing. So after February, when we post the Toolkit, we will not close the doors, but we're trying to get as much as possible posted in that time frame. The U.S. Composting Council has their annual conference coming up in Oakland, California in January 2014. You can see all the details at their website, including the program is up, and there'll be a full-day workshop or half-day workshop on the toolkit and sessions as well. And then Biocycle West Coast, we have a long-standing tradition of having great compostable plastics roundtables where everybody is invited to pull up their chairs and talk about what's going on and figure out how to link our conversations, link our resources, and really continue to make these tools, compostable plastics, as tools to capture food really valuable tools and sustainable packaging, as has been mentioned. So I thank all of you for participating, and I welcome you to the conversation.
Thank you. So Keith here, and starting to see a lot of questions coming in. I'm trying to answer some of them about a few questions, but I'll post just a few things. This is a 90-minute webinar, and we will end on time at 1/2 past. And then 2, yes, this is being recorded and will be available for download at the end. Lynn, wondered if you could clarify, will there also be just the slide deck or only the recording?
I think we can make available both if people are interested.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I'm starting to see themes of questions, so I'm going to start in some general themes and look to the panel to discuss a few of those points, and then get to some of the more speaker-specific questions towards the end, and know that we can maybe use email to follow up on those if needed. Let's start first with the relative size of this industry, and is the composting infrastructure growing? What can we do to help that go faster? What sort of dependable growth do we project for the composting infrastructure? Let's see. I think, David, maybe you want to start with that, and then we'll bounce around to the group.
Boy, we don't capture many quantitative statistics. We're starting to get a lot of these questions. Qualitatively, I can talk about very large growth rates that we see, both in the amount of composting facilities being involved in Find a Composter. We routinely see healthy and steady growth for that one. I don't have a satisfying number to talk about that, except to say, we see at least 650 compost facilities. I think that the U.S. Compost Council might have some better statistics about that. I know they have a larger membership list. But and in terms of the actual number of companies, we have 150 members here in North America. Our European counterparts, there's about 240 active members for VINSOT or DINSERCO that do the OK Compost certification program.
Any other speaker with any insight to that topic?
This is Michelle. I'll jump in on that. Not to add necessarily the numbers, although, again, I think the numbers are increasing as we see the increase in the number of food waste programs, for example, as well as yard waste programs that are being brought on across the country. I just wanted to comment on the second half of the question, which is, what are the things that we can do? And year after year in our conferences, in our conversations, this comes up. And, one of the main things that comes up is working with the local infrastructure, whether usually it's a public agency that is designing the solid waste programming in that community, to make sure that these sustainability criteria are being taken on by those communities, so that they are prioritizing the capture of green waste and food waste for highest and best use, which would be returned to soil products. So I think, joining in the conversation in your local areas to make sure that those priorities are being represented as the solid waste programs are created, help to push the development of the composting infrastructure in those communities.
So just to follow up on that just a little bit, do we know, a follow-up question is do we know of any groups working to increase the feasibility of composting? So, one of the early maps we saw was kind of discussed quickly that tipping fees in the southeast are typically not too high, and so we see fewer composting places set there. So are there any groups lobbying for higher landfill fees or more consistency across the country?
I mean, I think this would be a great time to say become a member of the U.S. Composting Council, and that's really where that conversation is happening, not so much to increase tip fees, because that's a little more regional, but certainly to talk about the feasibility of the composting infrastructure and the priority of capturing these materials, sharing lessons learned from communities that have already tackled this. There's just a rich conversation going on in the Compost Council. So, you know, whether it's joining the conference or the listserv is very robust, and you can put those questions out and get information from all across the United States on what's working in communities around the country.
Good deal. One quickie about the conversations that are on the screen right now. A reminder not to forget about BioCycle in October in Ohio.
And Keith, it's Lynn. I also want to just chime in on the composters who are accepting food service packaging. That's one of the things that FPI's recovery groups are actually working on right now. It's actually taking some of those resources like findacomposter.com and getting specific information to food service packaging so that we have that available for people that are looking for that. So look for that from FPI soon to come.
Good deal. So let's talk a little bit more about then, you know, this session is all about composting, but I have had a couple of questions wanting to know what about recycling. In relative terms, is it an either-or question? Is it composting or recycling? Which is the bigger recovery option, or is it both? Maybe, Lynn, you could start us off with some insight there.
Well, I think recycling, composting, no matter what the question is, it's still a very, very local issue. And, you know, certainly from the recovery efforts that FPI is undertaking through the PRA and PRG, you know, we're looking at all possible options. And in some cases, there are some materials that enjoy both options. But again, you know, our message has to be check locally because it's just not a national solution at this point. It's really a local option.
Yeah, if I can just chime in, I think it really isn't it's a both, and it's all of the above. I mean, we talked a little bit about portion control as a way to prevent food waste, and I think the use of reusables is certainly preferable to the use of disposables. And so even before you get to recycling, there are other things you can do to look at the larger picture about how can we reduce waste and have a lower overall impact on the environment. And once you then eliminate those things, then you look at, okay, what food can we give to the food banks? What food can we give to animals before we even talk about composting? Or what can we do to increase our recycling so that that material can be put to a higher, better use, such as, you know, metal containers being recycled back into metal containers. But when you exhaust those things, and I think a lot of food service operators will quickly go to the conclusion that there's a lot of things that are just not practical given the way that they operate their business. And so by composting, you offer that kind of alternative to a landfill, but really as an operator and as a, you know, looking at it holistically, you have to exhaust all the other opportunities before you get to the composting question.
And Lynn, I was kind of hoping that you'd use that time to talk about that, you know, FPI is doing extensive work and MRF to market for opening recycling doors so that there's good options for both.
Well, that's exactly right. No question.
Okay.
Took the words out of my mouth, Keith.
How about a few words about polyethylene? I had a lot of questions about compostables with a polyethylene liner. You know, and those questions I'll kind of rattle through, and then maybe you can get us started, David. Could you clarify a little bit about is polyethylene coating compostables? We hear about some composters who do it, but then we see tests from EcoCycle Woods Inn that say that polyethylene is a contaminant. Is polyethylene the same as a PLA lining? What do we need to know there?
Okay, I'm not a chemist, so I won't go into too much detail, but there are certain polymers that are naturally biodegradable. The chemical structure allows microbes to break it down and eat those polymer chains as food. On the homepage of our website, there's a really excellent article from a reporter from Chemical and Engineering News that goes into, you know, a layperson's description of the chemistry. But there are certain chemical bonds or polymer chains that are just not able to be fragmented by microbes, and polyethylene is one of them. Polypropylene is another one. There are certain synthetic chemicals that cannot biodegrade and would never pass ASTM D6400. There are, however, other polymer chains that are completely biodegradable. Some of them are naturally derived polymers like polylactic acid or PLA, and some of them are synthetically derived. So the devil is in the details, and there are certain types of things you have to kind of look at. The term polyethylene is ubiquitous, and it generally, sometimes people will say that's all plastic. You look at a plastic bag, your trash bag, and you say, oh, that's polyethylene. But when you actually look into the chemistry, you realize, oh, no, it's actually something else. And even though it's synthetically derived, it has been tested, and it's fully and completely biodegradable in a compost facility.
Any other comments from our other speakers?
This is Lynn. This is certainly a question that we get all the time and we hear about, and to be honest with you, I've talked to a number of composters about it when I've been at the USCC conference. And it all gets back to that issue of it's a local issue. So as Michelle mentioned, composters are all very different, and the facilities that they run are very different. So something up in Seattle is going to be very different than a composter down in Atlanta, for example. So it really does speak to just asking that composter what they'll accept. And for me personally, that's one of the things that challenges I see is there's what's a compostable package versus what's a certified compostable package, so you get to the BPI certification, versus the question of a package that is accepted by composters. So unfortunately, it seems like there are three different terms that are thrown around that can get confusing even to those of us in the industry.
Yeah. And this happens a lot. I think the purpose of BPI certification is to have a benchmark that if a composter has any doubts or doesn't know or doesn't trust or is dubious about the waste generator, they can look for products that have BPI certification and know that it will go away in a managed compost facility.
So can you talk about size?
That's the purpose of it.
A lot of questions really curious about, who gets to make the cut as a composter. Is size matter? Is it anyone with a permit that allows for soiled paper? Give some people on the phone some ideas of what this facility looks like. Maybe David?
Yeah, I think this is probably better answered by the U.S. Compost Council. I know that it does vary from state to state, and some states are, very wide open and very accommodating. Other states are extremely stringent as to what gets cited and permitted. It's not just space, but it's land use, it's groundwater protection. There's a lot of things. I think that's a question for my colleague.
Yeah.
Sure, and so certainly some of the things that you're talking about are the permitting infrastructures in terms of who gets to have a compost facility at different sizes, and there's going to be a state-by-state requirement on what a permitted facility would look like. But I think for this conversation, we would be talking about what are the parameters that are required in order to have these materials fully disintegrate within the time frame that's outlined in the standard. And this is where there's some variability because different compost facilities run their compost cycle for different periods of time. Many do not go for 120 days, which is what the standard would say at temperature. But most of them are going to get the material up to a fairly high temperature, and that's one of the distinctions between, for example, a home composter that would probably not want to put these materials in their bin in the backyard because they're not going to get up to the temperature and moisture levels that would facilitate this type of disintegration. So I think what we really want to be looking at is the parameters under which those facilities operate. So for example, we're doing testing protocols right now to look at different materials in our 2 local composting facilities. We're very conscious right now of what's the moisture level and how are they different and what are the variabilities there. Are we getting to temperature every day and things like that. So those are the parameters that need to be matched to the lab standard at the commercial level. So when we say, compostable in a commercial system, those are the parameters we're talking about rather than, is it 10 acres or 100 acres?
Okay, excellent.
And Keith, if I could just add, this is Lynn. At least from a converter standpoint, that's one of the challenges that they face, is that they're developing products, and at the end of the day, they don't know where it's going to end up or what type of compost facility it's going to end up in. So that's another challenge we don't have an answer to, but just to raise and get people to be thinking about it.
Okay, a couple of questions about the examples used today, pretty heavily focused on the West Coast, and we look at some maps, but do we see this as a national opportunity and growth nationally, or do we see hot regions of the country with more activity? Maybe Michelle, you want to start?
Well, certainly as we're looking at the conversation and where people are most active, there are some hot spots. But I think one of the great opportunities in this conversation is we're trying to sort of get ahead of the wave. So if we look at the statistics that we're estimating the expansion and the use of these types of sustainable plastics, compostable plastics, what we're trying to do is use the case studies, lessons learned in the areas that are in the leading edge, California being one of them, in order to set standards and develop practices that can be implemented as we go into other areas of implementation. So I do think that you have hotspots in big cities, for example, that are taking on zero waste, taking that to the next level. Cities that have food capture programs. I mean, you can see those trends in terms of obviously who are using the materials, but we're anticipating that over time there will be a much greater use of these materials, and so we'd like to get some of these things figured out while there's still maybe some more isolated pockets of use before it expands to a point where it's much harder to manage standardization and things like that.
Okay. Quick question, here's one for you. You mentioned that Chipotle found the packaging didn't meet expectations. Wondered if you could go into that a little bit more of what you mean.
Well, actually, I can't. That's I don't have access to their specific specifications for what they needed the packaging to do. But whatever they did, I'm sure they did multiple tests on different types of equipment or different types of forks and plasticware, and for whatever reason, it didn't meet what their standards were for their businesses. So I think that's pretty common in some instances, in some locations. I mean, it's challenging to have a soup spoon made of corn-based plastic that isn't going to melt in a hot bowl of soup. So, things like that.
Okay. One observation that wouldn't it be a good idea for people who want to use the municipal toolbox to also line up and look at BPI's list of approved products and look for correlation for their area. So an observation there. And I think we've got 3 minutes left, and in that, just real quickly, I don't think we do because we kind of touched on what sort of numbers we have, but how do we start to get a handle on what's the generation versus the recovery, the composting recovery of both food service packaging and the food that it's intended to gather? Do we have any estimate or work headed that direction?
Yeah, I don't know of numbers like that in that tidy package, but I know there's people who are looking at it. I think part of the challenge from the council perspective is that we're actually trying to figure out who is accepting the material, where are the materials going. So I think that's some of the, mapping that you're looking at. If we can start to develop overlays of who's using it and how much they're taking in, how much are they screening out. That's a big, that's a great question.
Okay.
I'm sure there's smart people working on that right now. I don't have those numbers, but we'll follow up with the folks on the call, and I'll find out how we're tackling that.
So Lynn, you want to close this out with some last thoughts for the session today?
Sure. Thank you very much. I do hope, before I go any further, I do want to thank our friends at the Biodegradable Products Institute, the National Restaurant Association, and the U.S. Composting Council for joining in on this call. You know, this is something that we've wanted to do for quite some time. I hope you're as surprised, and I don't know if surprised is the right word, but you know, there's so much attention being paid to food service packaging by composters, by the restaurant folks, by the certifiers, obviously. And it really is very important for us all to be working on this together. You know, to the point of how much food waste is out there, and what's actually happening with it. There's a lot of attention to it, and until we get to the point where we get a better handle on it, we want to see that growing. But at the same time, we don't want to have composters be so confused that they decide to just shut it down and say we don't want any of the packaging because we can't deal with it. So it's only with all of us working together in a more collaborative way that we're going to be able to find some of the answers to some of the questions that were posed here today. So again, thank you for your time today, folks. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or send any of the other speakers on the call. We will be posting this webinar on our website along with the slides. Again, thank you very much, folks, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.